Hello. In Efir, the evening overview of the news from the television company Ostankiно. In this broadcast, the nuclear missiles of Russia and Great Britain will no longer be aimed at each other. These are the results of the talks in Moscow. The Minister of Fuel and Energy of Russia has promised effective measures on the liquidation of non-payments. The political strike in Belarus was not a general strike, but only a number of protests in a series of cities. The presidents of Russia and Tatarstan signed an agreement on the division and mutual delegation of powers. Today was the 5th anniversary of withdrawal of Soviet forces from Afghanistan. A sensational success of Russian skiers in Lillehammer. And now details about these and other events. Today in the Kremlin, the official Russian-British talks were conducted. The signed documents are evidence of the reciprocal acknowledgement of the fact that the Russian Federation and Great Britain are not adversaries. This was stated in the joint declaration of the President of Russia and the Prime Minister of Great Britain. The beginning of the official visit of the Prime Minister of Great Britain, John Majors, to Moscow was in accordance to tradition. The dignified guest placed wreaths on the tomb of the unknown soldier near the Kremlin wall, honoring, through a moment of silence, the casualties during the years of the Second World War. In the Georgian auditorium of the Kremlin, later, in the ceremony, the official meeting of the President of Russia, Boris Yeltsin, with John Majors, to the astonishment of journalists, they did not exchange speeches. The later given assessment of the two-sided relations as the best during the last decades excluded any speculation. Immediately after the ceremony, there were talks held in a narrow circle. During the Russian-British talks within the delegational level, they discussed the two-sided relations and international questions as well as situations in the hot points of the planet. As a result of the talks, a joint declaration was signed in which it states the authorities of Russia and Great Britain will be given the necessary instructions to no longer aim strategic nuclear missiles at each other. This must be realized no later than the 30th of May of this year. Answering questions, Boris Yeltsin and John Majors gave a high assessment of the conditions of the two-sided relationships. The British Premier expressed himself for reform in Russia and noted the development of cooperation in the political area, the trade and military spheres. One of the major topics at the discussions was the discussion of the situation in the former Yugoslavia. I must say that basically our positions coincide. And they coincide in the main thing. The main thing is to convey heavy equipment, which is in Sarajevo, to the UN forces. And correspondingly, then, there the fighting will cease. And secondly, through the path of dialogue to force both sides, the Serbs and the Muslims, to sit down at the dialogue tables and resolve the issue through a peaceful political way and to cease the war in Yugoslavia. Some people are now attempting to resolve questions regarding Bosnia without the participation of Russia. I would emphasize that this will not be successful and we will not allow this. Of course, Russia will actively participate in the talks, and so that by peaceful means these tragic events in Yugoslavia should end. I'm happy that Mr. Major supports our point of view. The continuation of the Russian-British talks was in the House of Government and naturally was concerned most to the economy in its political aspects and its local economic aspects. Among the first was Russia's entrance into the European Union, membership in the Group of Seven and GATT. According to the comments of John Major, England reacts with caution to this perspective, relying rather on closer cooperation and time, which is necessary for a broader distribution of the influence of the European Union toward the East. In the meantime, Britain by all means welcomes Russia's involvement for political consultations in all international organizations. More successfully, the heads of the governments discussed mutual cooperation. England today is in the third place among our partners. It is well known that there are such joint projects as the reconstruction of the telephone communications lines in Moscow, the refurbishing of the gas industry through the cooperation of Rolls-Royce and others. Also, according to Viktor Chernomyrdin, joint documents on a state level were not signed today. Exactly 5 years ago, the last Soviet soldier left Afghanistan. Today, this day is commemorated as the Day of the Memory to the international soldiers. During the last few years, on the topic of the Afghan war, much was said, although not little conjecture and pure speculation. One would think that the main lesson of the war, violence bears violence, and the military method to resolve a conflict leads to tragedy with unpredictable repercussions. That which is occurring in Afghanistan today is, namely, a tragedy. Yes, the Soviet forces poured the fire into the jihad, the holy war, with the infidels, and now jihad has become a war against one's own people. Since April of 1992, there is a merciless, unprincipled war for power. In Kabul alone, almost 10,000 Afghanis have died. Undisputedly, in the biography of all our compatriots who went through Afghanistan, this was a difficult period. It is not their fault that they were sent by a government which no longer exists. There, on a foreign land, no one asked them what their nationality was or which republic they represented. All of them were faithful to their military obligation, and no one has the moral right to blame them. There, on the set, they became blood brothers through woes and joys. They sent home in black coverings their own brothers, not Uzbeks, Russians, or Ukrainians. And their coffins were covered with the same flags, and the weight was increased by the same medals. The tears of mothers and the results of that war made them brothers. It is easier to endure humiliation and insult at home from so-called politicians of sovereign governments. There's an urge to draw borders through the fates and hopes of generations which now is not deprived of a strong sense of homeland and patriotism. What do you remember mostly about those long years in Afghanistan? If I answer your question directly, then of course the memories are connected first of all with people. For example, I still see before my eyes the city Kabul. And that Kabul which existed then when we left in 1989. I see before my eyes people who saw us off, and these people no one forced to come to the squares, to the streets. You mean to say the Afghans? Yes, mostly the Afghans. And not only in big cities, but in smaller villages along the road. I remember the flourishing city of Jalabat and those electrical systems which were constructed there with our help, with the help of the Soviet Union. And there's much good which one could remember there. Does it seem to you today, when the 5th anniversary is being noted of our withdrawal of our troops from Afghanistan, that we're forgetting perhaps that experience, that bitter experience, but also the people who endured that war? That was essentially the light of our society then. Yes, you're correct in saying that. The problem is that we forget those who are still living. We forget, may God forgive me, as we say. We forget those who are not only dead, but we forget those who remained there. There are 293 remaining there in prison. And with the liberation of these people today, no one is occupied. Naturally, one must also think of the living. And yesterday we held a triumphant meeting. Our Ministry of Defense, the mothers of the casualties were present, and I was ashamed to look in their eyes because the government sent their sons there. The government must also show concern, not only now for the dead, but for the living as well. Today in Kabul, a 4-day ceasefire was declared. The truce will permit to open all the roads into the capital to provide humanitarian aid and the removal from the city of the wounded, said the director of the Intermediary Commission on the Regularization of the Internal Afghanistani Crisis, Haqqani. He hopes that during the 4-day truce, the avenues to establish a permanent ceasefire in Afghanistan will be found. Today in the Kremlin, Boris Yeltsin and Mitimir Shamiev signed an agreement on the division of departmental duties and the delegation of powers between the Russian Federation and the Republic of Tatarstan. The political result of the talks was the fact that Tatarstan will participate in the elections of the Federal Assembly of Russia. Recognition by the Republic of the sovereignty of the Russian Federation, its legislation, and its constitution. The President of Russia called extremely important the search for new formulae of agreement. According to his words, in this matter, the federative accord was of help, but the judicial basis was the new Russian constitution. The President of Tatarstan, in return, stated that the dialogue establishes a model of relations built on the principles of right and justice. In general, the document signed today is evidence of the fact that in place of the dictating center, mutual consideration of the Russian Federation and all subjects of the Federation individually. A critical situation in the fuel energy sector of Russia forces miners to resort to the most decisive actions. Their regional acts of protest have seized the entire country from the Far East to the northwest. For 6 days, underground, the mine workers of Vorkuta remained forced to surface by mass infections and not by the promises of government, because the strikers would not likely be satisfied with rash and clearly temporary measures. For example, the payment of salary for November and December. The strike in Vorkuta is not terminated, but interrupted until the 1st of March. The tolerance was exhausted among the miners of Primorye as well. Not one of the workers of the Partizansk city descended into the underground work sites. Fuel they intend to give only to nurseries and hospitals. The local authorities who are used to difficulties are discussing an original way out of the situation, to use reactors of nuclear submarines for the supply of electricity to the Primorye cities. In Kuzbask, the general situation is assessed as a pre-strike situation. The miners of this region also demand timely salary payments, but under the condition that, and they also know that there is such a fact, that the annual coal excavation in Kuzbask has decreased by 14 million tons, and the number of employees has grown by 1/3. The finished products are not demanded by consumers. Stockpiles of mines and shafts are overflowing with coal. The most serious problems of the fuel energy sector today were the center of attention at the Zone Congress in Temirov. According to the opinion of the Minister of Fuel and Energy, Yuri Shafranik, who visited here many plants of the Temirov district, he who does not pay today makes a statement against economic reform. What is not paid today will be paid threefold tomorrow by us. Therefore, one must make this clear today. Can you do this? I don't know, although these measures are extremely painful. We do not propose any painless methods. They don't exist. Such a painful measure could be the decree of the President on the responsibility to be carried for the delay in paying for products. The project of the decree foresees responsibility of the directors of the plants for non-payment, even to the criminal level, said Yuri Shafranik. The debt of the Russian government for orders of their own defense industry for last year amounted to 2 trillion rubles. And it is excessive to say in what a severe situation are the plants and the workers there. A momentous moment. What occurred today in the defense industry? Today the basic payments were issued for the government debts for the defense orders of 1993. A decision was adopted by government, and the funds were issued by the central bank and correspondingly by the Ministry of Finances. And these allow us to pay for more than half of our debts, I would say. First of all, this measure will solve the simple problem, that is, the problem of paying the people what they have earned and what they have been waiting for a long time. This measure solves also the problem of the payment of debt to companies filling defense orders, their middlemen and suppliers, including the energy workers, etc. That is, we hope that in the plants and in the apartments, it will be much warmer in many regions. During the next 2 or 3 days, the funds will begin to arrive at the defense plants of Siberia and the Far East. Today, on the central street of Nizhny Novgorod, there is a large, mournful procession. Who are you bearing, Alexander Alexandrovich? The higher academic institution and science, they have died from complete starvation for the attention of government and the president. All of this is a unique performance, a theatrical presentation in which participated more than 1,000 students and instructors, workers of higher schools and scientific institutions. But the essence of what was happening was real and extremely serious. In Nizhny Novgorod, there are 12 higher institutions and many scientific research institutes whom the government owes 150 billion rubles, and now they are barely managing to make ends meet. And they exist only because of the subsidies from the budgets of the cities and the district. It is understandable that such a situation threatens the development of the entire region and the industrial and scientific and cultural center of Russia. Without live science, all reforms are dead. And in Moscow, the action of the labor unions of workers of higher academic institutions became a demonstration, which included representatives of all capital academic institutions. The salary of faculty professors is 65,000 rubles currently. The institutes have no opportunity to pay for light, heating, and other communal services. And other sharp declines in institutes of science, research, or work brings economic damage of a larger amount than the sum of the annual financing of the higher institutions. Belarus has only one chance to survive, says the Prime Minister of the Republic, Vyacheslav Kevich, to enter closer ties with Russia. In order to complete this step, however, said the head of the Belarusian government, it is necessary to have social and political stability. An attempt to conduct a political strike is a proof that such stability in the Republic does not exist today. The authorities did not impede the participants of the strike to congregate on the Independence Square, although here, according to the decision of government, only official events are allowed. For the meeting with the deputies of the parliamentary opposition, members of the strike committee, and representatives of the independent unions, their supporters arrived. At the demonstration, demands were heard about the resignation of the current government, the creation of a coalition government, and holding early elections. And yet, the idea of conducting an indefinite political strike apparently did not receive support among the overwhelming majority of labor unions, and therefore the official unions in their statement assessed this action as premature. Many large plants are not intending to participate in the strike. The action was condemned by the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet and the government as well. The participants of the meeting, which happened on the Independence Square, later headed toward the Supreme Soviet, where they made their political demands. The next meeting in Minsk with an exit onto the Independence Square will be in 1 week, on the 22nd of February, when on this day the session of the Supreme Soviet of Belarus resumes its work. The Premier of Russia, Viktor Chernomyrdin, signed a document according to which the excise surcharges on liquor and alcohol products will be decreased compared to the current from 90 to 85%. However, the tariffs on imported alcoholic beverages will be increased from 100 to 300%. According to the authors of this document, this will allow, first of all, to somewhat decrease the price on domestic alcohol and vodka production and to make it more competitive on the Russian market as a result of the increase in prices on export alcoholic beverages. Last year, despite the goods and food abundance on shelves, Russians decreased by 1/3 the consumption of butter, by 1/4 meat and dairy products, and by 20% their consumption of sugar. These figures were heard at a meeting today of the Coordination Committee of the Ministry of Rural Industry and Productivity of Russia. It would seem that for cheap products, we must forget about those. The price race on energy sources, resources, and fertilizers, excessive taxes, and non-payment for sold goods don't allow the peasant to perfect productivity and reduce its cost. Still under question is the spring sowing task. As of today, the technical capacity of the industries in the majority of regions in Russia does not allow it to be accomplished in optimum time limits. The situation is already quite complicated. It can be even called critical. I hope still that we will complete the sowing season, and perhaps with some limitations and restraints, with not quite so high a standard of quality seeds. Naturally, we will bring in a significantly smaller amount of mineral fertilizers, and therefore the conditions of formulating harvest for 94 will be worse than last year and worse than the year before that. In Chechnya, 2 oil wells have been blown up. One of them was extinguished, but for the extinguishing of the second, not less than a month will be needed, says Interfox. According to the fact on the explosion, the Department of State Security of the Republic has opened a criminal file according to the statute of terrorist acts. The explosions were conducted according to preliminary versions with the use of a magnetic mine with a timer or a remote control mechanism. At the Saratov production plant, the association Neutron, from this tank a chlorine leak occurred. But in the current case, there's no cause for concern. The leak of the hazardous vapors was simulated by an experimental model. From Moscow, observers who arrived on a project of the government acquainted themselves with the situation in the sector, where only last year there were 30 cases, which are classified as extraordinary. There were explosions, fires, and stoppages, and the most terrible, there were human deaths. Now in the sector there are more than 150 potential dangerous objects, including the plants of the oil chemical sector and main pipelines. Their technological resources have been depleted, the equipment has been worn down. And probably to fight with the repercussions of the emergency force is easier than to prevent them, although it is necessary to professionally do both. And therefore, for the first time in Russia, instead of a social commission, in Saratov, a permanent committee on emergency situations was created in the structure of the district administration, where the specialists were chosen by competition. Those who were successful were not those who simply wanted to show off before the High Commission, but those who wanted to train people, and better to defend them, ridding them of the need to remain hostages of omnipotent departments and economic chaos. The annual message of the President of Russia will probably be heard in Parliament not on Friday, the 18th of February, as was scheduled earlier, but somewhat later. This was announced by the Press Secretary of the President. The reasons for the postponement are possibly the lingering effects of the cold of Boris Yeltsin. According to Interfax's information, the address of the President in Parliament may occur on the 24th of February. However, the question on the postponement of the date of the presidential address is not finalized yet. Perestroika of our society was begun by Khrushchev himself. This was stated at a press conference in the House of the Russian Movement of Democratic Reforms by Alexander Yakovlev, having in mind that Nikita Sergeyevich was the initiator of the processes which defined the fate of the country in ensuing years. On the 17th of April this year will be 100 years since the birthday of the man whose name became the symbol of the thawing of the 1960s. For this date, a conference is planned, whose steering committee includes, apart from Alexander Yakovlev, Gavril Popov, Yegor Yakovlev, Nikolai Shmylov, and they are all descendants of Nikita Sergeyevich. So as not to judge and prejudice on the epoch of Khrushchev, to the conference are invited the participants of events of most varying attitudes, including near and distant foreign countries. Many connect to the date of the conference with predictions of certain experts on political changes in Russia in the spring of this year. Therefore, speaking about the political significance of the conference, Gavril Popov noted that he sees a coincidence in today's situation with the elections of the local organs of self-rule with those events which preceded the abolition of the reformer Khrushchev by the uncontrollable local elites. In any case, the aim of the conference does not enter, according to Yegor Gaidar, into the drawing of direct parallels, but the main aim is to establish the truth about that era. The truth of today is the ever-broadening number of parties in Russia. As of today, the official birthday of another party, the so-called party of the majority. In the party, the majority, there was an organizational congress in Moscow today. There are 150,000 members. But as its chairman, Vyacheslav Greshnev, feels that is for now. By July, there will be 1 million of Bolsheviks, not to be confused with Bolsheviks, but we don't know otherwise how to call the members of this organization. The party of the majority, according to its definition, is the party of the middle class, with a clear orientation to private business. The party of those who, with their own hands, not through seizing state property, are ready to work on the prosperity of the country. On the registration form for the party model, they say this way: the ideals are stability, lawfulness, and patriotism. The structure, regional organizations, membership, individual and family membership, finances by donations and membership dues, discipline, rigid and democratic centralism. However, they refute their comparison with the Communist Party of the Soviet Union and don't recognize any radicals from Zhirinovsky to Novodvorskaya. Their tactical goal, the PB, the party of the majority, feels the development on the party level of a model of a dignified human and social existence. Their strategic goal, they see, as, after coming to power, to incarnate this model into life. Yuri Lushkov has sent a welcome to the newly organized party. One must say that lately there has been a significant growth in the political activity of social organizations. There are 40 parties registered. The PB is the 41st. And about its fate and survivability, its future deeds will judge. In the Rostov district, executed is the murderer, maniac Chikatilo, in Russia, Ukraine, and Central Asia, having committed more than 50 murders. 1 week ago, he received a refusal to his request for clemency sent to the name of the President of Russia. NATO has no power to make decisions on the essence of the Bosnian regularization, including the launching of air attacks in Bosnia. Such decisions must be made by the UN Defense Council. This was part of the statement of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, which was sent to the United Nations. During these days, the special representative of the President of Russia, the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, Vitaly Churkin, is touring former Yugoslavia. The aim of his dialogues is to do everything possible to avoid the aviation attacks in the Sarajevo region. According to him, unilaterally, the de-blockade of Sarajevo must be carried out. In Washington, a meeting took place with the President of the United States, Bill Clinton, and the President of Kazakhstan, Nursultan Nazarbayev, who is in the United States with an official visit. After the talks, the leaders of the two countries signed a charter on the democratic partnership between Kazakhstan and the United States. Nazarbayev also gave Bill Clinton a ratificational certificate on the joining of the Republic of Kazakhstan to the Agreement on Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons as a non-nuclear government. The Slovak shipbuilding Kamarna on Dunaj emerged after the war to the world level because of Soviet orders. And lately, in the last few years, cooperation unfortunately was severed, and even more so was the triumphant ceremony today, the christening of a new cargo ship with a capacity of 2,700 tons, built for the Northern Caspian Fleet, as assigned to the Astrakhan port. This ship is in the class of the River Ocean sea vessels. With unique features, its steering equipment with the state-of-the-art equipment can make the ship ascend or descend by 4.5 meters, which is important for loading containers and the passage under bridges. The length of the ship is 82.5 meters. Its width more than 11 meters, which allows passage through any canals and quays. It does not fear high ocean waters. We haven't worked on such ships, but we are certain that this ship will be worthy to fly the Russian flag through all rivers and seas wherever it will be. The ship was launched into the water in 1 month. Boris Kustodiev, the first ship of the North Caspian Fleet, will enter from here into the broad waters of the Dunaj River and will set its course for the new and yet familiar Russian shores. From the broad itinerary today of Norma Major in Moscow today, and which included a Kremlin walk, acquaintance with the Skating Academy and the figure skaters, we chose only one item, that is, the visit by the wife of the English Prime Minister to the 9th Clinical Hospital, the Central Russian Pediatric Burn Center. Such flyers with the address of the hospital appeared in London recently. The Society of the Friends of the Russian Children told in them about the experience and self-sacrifice of our doctors, and at the same time about the material deprivations which are forced to be endured in the hospital lately. Norma Major was the good news bearer of the organization, reminding us of the English saying, "A guest is remembered not by his good words, but by his good deeds." The toys given by Mrs. Major to the sick children and the medications brought from England were the beginning for the benevolent program planned by the English. More than $200,000 collected for the benefit of the Burn Center, a special installation for such a profile of hospital of a laundry with apparatus which will be prepared in London will begin. This is all the information that I have by this hour, but our sports commentators are fully justified in affirming that the most sensational reports for the day are in the world of sports. About sports after the advertisements. All the best. Hello, my dear friends. Today at the Olympic Games, it is the 4th day of competitions. 3 groups of prizes have already been awarded. However, it's still far to the 8th of March, but today one can call today Women's Day in Lillehammer, since the women were competing for prizes. It is true, the figure skaters in pair skating, and I think that women here have a direct relationship to this form of figure skating. But the main event of the day began this morning here at the ski stadium. The distance of 5 kilometers by classical style. The Olympic champion, the Italian Manuela Di Scena, gave the tone, but she was finishing and had to wait for the results of her main contender, Lyubov Yegorova from St. Petersburg, who literally flew over the distance. During the last few meters, the hopes of Dyachenko were shattered. Lyubov Yegorova is the champion. What is your favorite distance? Tell us. Previously, I loved very much the long distances, but now I, for some reason, prefer the short distances. But on such a short distance, you won about 20 seconds. I was surprised myself. Before the finish, I managed to gain 11 seconds and then managed 8 more seconds. The main sensation was born high in the mountains on the super gigantic course where the 22-year-old Svetlana Gladышeva from Moscow, after 38 years, brought our country an Olympic medal and even a silver one. Good work, Svetlana. I didn't expect to have any victories, but I feel myself very lucky and I'm very happy. The championship of the Games was a 26-year-old American, Diane Roth, who in Albertville was the silver medal holder in the giant slalom. The Olympic fire from the last Games in France burns to the new form of sport in freestyle. Today, the qualificational competitions in Mogul took place, after which 4 of our athletes, headed by the holder of the silver Albertville medal, the Muscovite Alexandra Elizaveta Kazhanikova, entered the finals. In the men's tournaments, we are hoping for Sergei Shuplitsov to not let us down. Today, at the hockey tournament, there were 3 matches, one of which is already finished. In the first period, the Swedish team, in the last second, succeeded in its meeting with the Italian team. After the break, the Italians, after Zarilo's goal, balanced the score. But the Swedes again grabbed the initiative and Stillman pushed Traikonur ahead. And this is the final result. And one more opening of the Olympiad, the baritone Dmitry Kharitonov. It was only after everything, and the applause of the Queen in Norway was unbelievable. Kharitonov and Rachmaninoff, this is gold, and the artist is a Russian living in Italy. To return and sing for the Soviet public, to sing in the Bolshoi Theater, and to sing this repertoire, this Russian repertoire for Russian listeners who will applaud me after every song. Good evening. The northern anticyclone, which moved from the territory of Karelia to Poland, has weakened its influence on the central areas of Russia. Therefore, tomorrow it will be warmer. In the west of the central region, at night it will be -10, -15. During the day, -6 to 11. The Baltic countries and the Kaliningrad district will be in the zone of the influence of this anticyclone. The clear and cold weather will remain. The temperatures at night -13 to 18. During the day, -8 to 13. In Estonia, -2 to 7. In the northern areas of European Russia, the temperature and the pressures will be low. In the Nenetsk Autonomous District, in the Polar, Ural, and the Komi Peninsula, it will be snow with snowstorms. The temperatures at night, -7 to 12. During the day, -4 to 9. In Karelia, the Leningradsk and Volогодsk districts, it will be warmer. During the night, -8 to 13. During the day, -5, -10. On the Kolsk Peninsula, it will be snowy tomorrow. During the night, -5 to 10. During the day, -2 to 7. In Belarus, Ukraine and Moldova, there will be still influence of that same anticyclone. It will be sunny and cold during the night, -10 to 15. In some places, down to -20. During the day, -5 to -10. In the central Chernozem areas, as previously, it will be intermittently cloudy with some brief snow. During the night, -7 to 12. During the day, -4 to 9. It will be colder in the central Volga area. They're expecting windy, cloudy weather with snow. The temperatures during the day will not rise above -12. On the lower Volga, it is extremely dry during the night, -8 to 13. During the day, -5, -9. On the lower Don, northern Caucasus and beyond the Caucasus, in the zone of atmospheric front, it will be cloudy with some intermittent snow and wet snows. The temperatures at night, -5, 10. During the day, -0 to -5. On the Black Sea coast, +3, +5. In Petersburg, tomorrow it will be intermittently clouded without significant precipitation. The temperatures at night, -7 to 9. During the day, -1, -3. In Moscow, intermittently cloudy with some snow. The winds from the northwest, 4 to 7 kilometers per second. During the night, -10 to 12. During the day, -3, -5. Goodbye, all the best.
Теперь в любом почтовом отделении России вы можете купить акции OB Дипломат Все почтовые отделения России. Наш уставный фонд 100 миллиардов рублей. Купи себе немного All-B.